18. Future imperfect. The older process forced its bloated body forward. "Now disrupts!" it spluttered, breathless as it struggled to match the speed set by the younger creature. The monsters arched their way along the outer spiral of the tower. In the iron skeleton of the edifice, the engines pulled against each other, wheels jarred and juddered, chains splintered and flailed in murderous spirals. A repeated clank came from one of the broken bells as its mechanism jammed in a parody of frozen time. "Are these your rumours?" croaked the younger. The older process ignored the jibe. It swung its head to stare out over the grey city. "This now is new. Before, this now never exists. Not when this process was you. In my memories, it is not here. It is now," the younger insisted. Thin jets of steam spurted into the sky from all over the tangle of disparate buildings below. The city trembled as all points in its time flung their protest into the sky. Already a billowing thunderhead cumulus was forming, mixing with the smoke nebula that hung amongst the coloured stars. The storm cloud loomed over the city, flickering with light from within. "Omens," warned the older process. "Ill portents. The doctor, he returns. The guards, what do they report?" They listened to the chattering messages of alarm that rose from across the city. A guard on the city's main artery had seen a wall of cold fire that moved slowly north towards the Dial Square. On the grey bank near the mill wheel, a guard reported a host of shrews that ran squealing into the flood of the Mercury stream. In a courtyard near to the southern delta, where all the streams met, a grey clock had climbed from its plinth and scuttled away on its hands. On another artery, a sudden wind had whipped up the dust into a cloud. It circled 3 times in the shape of a carrion bird and flew off into the stars. The older process's fins rippled with rage at the news. "The guard captain, where is it?" it demanded. "Where is its report?" News chittered back. The captain clung to the parapet of a spidered building as it shook in the tremor. He watched the phasals below him. It was the older group, far from their designated work location without leave. They moved through the grey shadow streets with a purpose that suggested they had been summoned, either by design or instinct. Either way, their usual subservience had been overcome by a boldness that would be their downfall. "These omens, they are not ill-fated," declared the younger process. The elder's beady eyes stared from around its slobbering mouth. "For who? Now disrupts. The birthright, it must be secured. The doctor returns. You grow too old to see. These signs foretell what we seek. The future, at last, it emerges. Then you should be afraid." At first there was a hint of suspicion in the way he eyed her. "Come on, Professor, you're needed," she said. "Needed? What do you take me for? A loaf of bread?" His voice was weary and slow. He had not moved from the chair. His hair was dishevelled, and there were silver beads like mercury in the cross-ply of his pullover. "This is too soon," he muttered. "Much too soon." His eyebrows furrowed as he studied her. She wasn't convinced he knew who she was. She crouched in front of him and attempted a comforting smile, the sort doctors use. It came out completely forced. "Take it easy, Professor. It's me, Ace. You've had a bit of a shock. We both have. I don't know what happened to the TARDIS, but I reckon we can find it again if we both keep—" She tailed off. He wasn't listening to her. He stared at the floor with a blank expression. "I don't know what you've been up to," she heard herself saying, "but you didn't half stir things before you disappeared. You got yourself a reputation." She stopped again. She was babbling uselessly just to get some response, but she had never seen him so frighteningly passive. She brushed a cobweb off his shoulder and touched the back of her hand against his forehead. "You don't have a temperature anyway." "I don't." He suddenly looked alarmed and pressed his own hand to his head. I mean, it's normal, that's all, she stuttered. Oh, normal. A gentle smile played across his face. How strange. I'm not sure I've ever been normal before. He looked directly at her, and then his eyes twinkled. It was like a signal. She flung her arms around his shoulders and hugged him. Where have you been? She choked through her tears. You don't know the things I imagined. After a moment, his hand patted her cautiously on the shoulder. She pulled back and studied his face, just checking that all the details were still there. Tell me about it, he said. She had grown used to this, his little tests, designed to build up her skills and awareness, or so he always said. Right, she agreed, and sat down cross-legged at his feet. You know about the city, yeah? After a moment he said, Tell me from your point of view. Right, she fathomed her thoughts. It's well weird out there. It's not just one city, it's like the same city again and again, like the past and future all mapped out alongside each other. Time and space must be seriously scrambled. She paused, waiting for him to wince at her vernacular, but the idea was more important than the correct scientific appraisal. He was pulling intently at another strand of cobweb. Concurrent time strands, he suggested. That's right. Like living next door to last week. It's all tumble down. A sort of grey no-go area. And there's two really gross megaworm things that control it from a big tower that's like an accident in a Meccano factory. And these worms, they're called processes or the process or something, are looking for the future. He raised an eyebrow. The future. Pretty stupid, eh? She grinned. But they've got a slave gang out there taking the place apart. I mean, how can you search for the future? Why not? He said, and leaned back in his chair. His smile intensified as he mused on the conundrum. She could almost see his mind starting to gallop. These process creatures of yours must be metaphysicians of a high order. I wonder if they'd spare me the time for a little chat. You've got to be joking, Professor, she exclaimed. Hold them up to the light, not a brain cell in sight. I'll tell you what, though. I reckon it was them that attacked the TARDIS. The TARDIS, he said slowly. And they've had it in for you since the beginning. They have. You had a fight with one of them. You must remember. They say it's you that nicked the future in the first place. Me? He said, checking his trouser pockets. Did I? She grinned. You've got a bit of a reputation out there. Good or bad? Depends, but I've been working on it. How do you know all this? He said, plainly flattered. Were you there? You know I wasn't. Then how? The Phasals told me. The slave gang. The old Grumblies tell this story of your fight with the process and how you got beaten up and did a runner. They tell it like some sort of ancient myth. The old Grumblies. Yeah, well, the young versions are a bit iffy, but then they've only just got here, haven't they? So they're bound to be a bit confused. Oh, yes, he said, and smiled sympathetically. And another thing. You realise the Phasals are from Gallifrey? I mean, they're Time Lords. But then you'd know that from Shonzi. Her eyes flickered with anger for a moment. You could have talked to me instead of him, you know. I thought you trusted me. Yes, he said. Of course. Sorry. Struth, thought Ace. Either he's seriously out of his hat, or things have taken a turn for the better. She couldn't remember ever hearing him apologise to anyone before. The next thing had to be tackled with a degree of caution. The thing is, they sort of expect you to sort it all out. I mean, I tried, Professor, but, well, you know. So you keep saying, he declared. Is that all I need to know? Well, you're better at this sort of thing than I am. I see. There's just one or two points I'm a bit hazy about. Like what? He smiled as if to allay any fears, but it looked like a brave face, speedily plastering over the cracks. Phasals and Grumblies and Time Lords, he said. And this Gallifrey. Who exactly is he? Ace swore loudly, an expletive in binary a siren that sounded like an angry phone number. She had forgotten she knew it, and had never really known what it meant, but it sounded agreeably damning. Even the doctor looked startled. She was up to it in her eyebrows and she hadn't a clue what to do next. There was a clatter on the wooden steps outside. Ace spun round to stare at the trapdoor in the floor, dreading whatever was going to emerge from the world outside. A head plastered down with soaking red hair appeared. It eyed them for a second and broke into a wide grin. "Shonzi!" Ace exclaimed. "You found him then?" he said. "Yeah, I found him." "Where's Vale?" Shonzi touched his swollen lip and said, "Cleared off." He climbed up into the doctor's attic and shook his head like a terrier emerging from the pond. A spray of water fanned outwards through the air. His clothes were drenched. "What happened to you?" Ace said. "I think it's called rain. Come and see." "Later." She tried vaguely to block his way, but he was already pushing past. He peered shyly at the doctor. "I bought these," he said, holding out the battered hat and rod. To Ace's horror, she found that the doctor had climbed out of his chair and was advancing unsteadily towards the newcomer. "How d'ye do?" he said, switching into his most genial mode. He took the hat and rod and studied them curiously. "Mine?" he asked. "You gave them to him," Ace said sharply. "Ah." Shonzi looked uncomfortable and said, "You dropped them really, but you said I could have them in a dream." "Did I?" said the doctor, impressed. "You must be Shonzi," said Shonzi. "Yes, I'm my friend here." "Ace," snapped Ace. He waved a gracious hand. "Thank you. You're very kind. Perhaps you'd deal with the introductions." "You're the doctor and she's Ace," Shonzi said. "Thanks," Ace said flatly. Her annoyance made her feel immensely guilty. "Are you coming down or what?" said Shonzi. "They're all waiting." "What for?" she said. "For me, of course," interrupted the doctor with a smile. "Don't make such a fuss. I have a reputation to live up to, so let's go and find out exactly who I am." "Professor!" He marched towards the trapdoor and Shonzi stood clear to let him pass. Ace ran after him, praying that she could bluff their way out. As she came down through the door, the city hit her in the face. Sound exploded round her. The shock was almost deafening. The streets drummed with falling rain. Water gushed from the tops of the gutterless buildings. It splashed down into the thoroughfares, turning the dust to mud. The air was washed deliciously clean and rich. From the top of the steps, Ace saw what looked like a clump of shining coloured mushrooms. Despite the clouds, there was still light from somewhere. "Ready!" called Shonzi from behind her, and the coloured umbrellas swayed apart to reveal the drenched phasals underneath. They gave a loud huzzah! It was the older group, the Grumblies. Their drab clothes were gone. Instead, they were arrayed in a bizarre mix of clothes, all random in bright colours and styles. Ryogus, dressed in a blue tunic with yellow fleur-de-lis, raised a sort of bugle to his lips and blew a wild elephantine fanfare. The instrument spluttered as the warm rain got into its valves. There was little shelter under the new arch formed by the collapsed wall, but they were not deterred. Ryogus burst out laughing and threw the bugle into a puddle. They hurried up eagerly to meet the doctor. Chespearl in green, Amnoni Distayisor in rich scarlet, and Ryogus all laughing under their makeshift coloured canopy of umbrellas. Only Peccary held back, standing under his black brolly, awkward in his maroon jacket. His lank hair was pulled across his blank eye. The doctor walked happily into their midst and was festooned with bedraggled garlands made out of old newspaper. "Welcome, welcome," they kept repeating. Ace stood a little way back, a nagging suspicion that this outburst was badly mistimed. Shonzi took her arm. "Come on, beanbag," he said, and pulled her down the steps. "It'll be all right. This is what we've been waiting for. It's no place for a child to grow up." "A child?" she said, and remembered the skinny, ginger-haired kid. The kid who had the same coloured hair that he had. "You mean you?" Time was a mess in this place, all right. A real mess where the past caught up with you and you had to look after yourself. "Not just me," he said darkly, but then his face brightened. "You said the doctor'd rescue us. It's redemption at last." The doctor, already drenched, was laughing too. The rain streamed down the Phasals' upturned faces as they danced in a joyous ring around him. Shonzi pulled Ace into the circle, and she was surrounded by smiles. The downpour ran through her straggled hair. She felt cleansed. Her relief at finding the doctor at all got the better of her forebodings over his state of mind. "Quenisanda Oliesti," Amnoni called to Peccary, her superior demeanour washed away. "Don't be such a wet vest. Come and join in." He smiled weakly and allowed himself to be dragged into the dance. They splashed and laughed and twirled their umbrellas, and the doctor stood at their centre, content to watch their celebration. They stopped as suddenly and as instinctively as they had started. With a degree of ceremony, each of the Phasals closed their coloured umbrellas. One by one, they laid them at the doctor's feet like religious icons before a saint. He said nothing. Either he was still confused, or reluctant to disrupt a ceremony that was clearly important to the Phasals. The rain had begun to ease. The cloud overhead was gone, and with it the smoky nebula. The stars burned like torches. Ace saw Chespearl and Ryogus whispering together. "Yes, I want to," the young woman kept insisting. They turned and approached solemnly through the last spatterings of rain. "Doctor," Chespearl said nervously, "if you are to bring deliverance from this place to us, Ryogus and I have one boon to ask from you." "Ah," said the doctor, and he began to look uncomfortable. Ryogus had taken hold of Chespearl's hand. "We may have misjudged you in the past, Doctor," he blustered, "but we bear you no ill will now." The heavy man was awkward with words, but his exuberance was overwhelmingly genuine. He almost shook with emotion like an Italian tenor. Ace was touched and relieved he didn't sing. "This world is no place to bring up a child," he said. Ace turned to Shonzi with a look of disbelief. He took and squeezed her hand. Ryogus looked at Chespearl to continue. "We would ask you to be the god's guardian of our child when it is born," she said. "And we hope it won't be here, Doctor," added Ryogus quickly. The doctor gave a worried smile. Ace could see him almost squirm as the focus of this deeply private request. Around them the buildings dripped balefully. The stonework and streets, dry for so long, were already absorbing the surface water. "I think," the doctor said, "that you may be talking to the wrong person." The returning silence was broken by a series of clattering crashes. All around them, windows in the grey walls were flung open. The red insect-helmeted guards, their eyelets bristling, stared and chittered down at the Phasals. A figure stepped out onto a balcony above them. "It's a long time since I was invited to a party," called Vale. "You weren't asked because you weren't wanted," retaliated Ace. The Phasals had bunched together around the doctor. He looked dangerously close to introducing himself again, but Ace laid a firm hand on his arm and muttered, "Save it, Professor." "No respect to Professor," he complained. "I wish you'd make up your mind." "I wish you'd find yours." Peccary had stepped forward, his face grim. "Vale Vuriansti, call off the guards," he warned. "Not a chance," said Vale with quiet confidence. The Phasal captain stood firm. "There will be no more cooperation, Vale. Time is altering in the city. The processes no longer have any control over us." Silence. The creatures stared impassively down from their watch places. The washed air was fresh with expectancy. Ignoring the others' pleas, Ryogus broke from the ranks of the group. "Do you know what you are?" he railed at the guards. "Do you remember what you were? Do you? Well, it's over. You'll be free of it too. The doctor's here now. He's come back." A whip cracked close by. At the head of the street stood the shape of the guard captain. Ryogus stepped forward, eager to challenge the brute, but the other Phasals pulled him back. The guard captain advanced slowly, chitinous armour scraping, until it stopped a few yards away. A potent threat, but they did not shrink from its malign alien chittering. "The doctor! Where is he?" it croaked. "Wait," said Vale from above. "Time to parley." Ace was astonished as the Phasals suddenly moved into a cluster. "Ask him what his terms are," Amnoni advised Peccary. Their captain shook his head. "If we parley, we must have terms of our own." "But it'll take too long to decide," said Chespearl. "We must remain a crew," insisted Peccary. "We work together." The doctor was smiling with benign vagueness, but his eyes were darting everywhere as he took every available ounce of information on board. Ace followed his gaze and saw that the guards had vanished from the windows. Shonzi, growing increasingly infuriated, had noticed as well. "I'll take them on single-handed if need be," announced Ryogus. "Stupid bloody grumblies," Shonzi exploded. "Don't you ever do anything?" "I'm waiting," said Vale from the balcony. "No parley," shouted Shonzi. "Tell the worms, if they haven't managed to work it out for themselves, that there's an alternative to their world. The doctor here has the future." "Hang on a minute," cried Ace, "and he's going to lead us out of this hellstrom hole and take us home." Vale made a loud scoffing noise. The phasals and guards looked at the doctor. Silence. "Go on then," said Ryogus. "Do it." Ace held back. It occurred to her that she wanted to see how he was going to react. He needed to prove himself. The doctor was shaking his head sadly. "I fear that was a presumptuous and very rash statement to make, Shonzi. You may all regret it." "Take them," said Vale, and he did not disguise his relish. Doors opened and the guards issued onto the street. "You can't attack us," warned Peccary. "You know that's not permissible in the rules." The chittering creatures, making mockery of their prey in encrusted shape and angular movement, started to close in. Their clustered anemone islets rippling under the currents of their process master's will, a power channeled through their brutal captain and directed by the cruel and treacherous overseer on the parapet above. "Up here!" yelled Ace, and she started to push the doctor and the phasals in their heavy, sodden clothes up the steps towards the trapdoor. "Ryogus!" shouted Chespel from halfway up as he scooped up a rock. He hurled it at Vale, who ducked instinctively from practiced experience. Ryogus cursed and ran up the steps for cover. "I want him!" shouted Vale. A scorpion whip cracked through the air and coiled round Ryogus's ankle as he reached the top. He stumbled back, striking his head against the edge of the trap, and fell the length of the ladder. His massive frame lay face down in the mud. Chespel cried out and ran back down. In the street, the advancing guards froze in their tracks and were silent. Vale leaned over the balcony in apparent desperate concern. Like terrified kids, thought Ace, when a game gets murderously out of control. Behind her, the other phasals waited. The doctor stood beside her, watching intently. Ryogus's hand moved for a second, and then was still. Chespel fell forward with a shriek. One of the guards, a massively built creature, stood shaking and bewildered as its fellows backed away from it. Then it simply dissolved into thin air like candle smoke and ceased to exist. The other creatures clutched their claws to their insect heads and let up a chorus of raucous chittering. Vale yelled after them as they fled away up the street. The horror struck at Ace. "What's happening?" she whispered. "I said it was too soon, much too soon," muttered the doctor, and then he tensed. His voice suddenly took on the old authoritarian tone that she had longed for. He looked down at Chespel, weeping over her dead lover. "Destroy the present, and the future ceases to exist," he said. He stalked down the steps. "Vale Voriansti," he called. A slight form, dripping hair matted down, clothes wringing wet, was suddenly a focus of power. An opposition to all the nothingness, the mièvre of this place, a world apparently dead before it had even lived. "Take a message to your masters. Tell them that Wilby is here. Tell them that Wilby challenges them for control of the city, and inform them that I am Wilby." Vale sneered and didn't wait to hear any more. He turned and vanished from the balcony. The other phasals were descending the steps to gather around the body of Ryogus. Ace didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Dr. Wilby?" she asked incredulously. The doctor looked sternly at her and snapped back, "Will be the doctor."